Hey, and welcome to the Joie Miller Podcast. I am Pastor Joie Miller, and I'm so excited that you're joining me today. This whole podcast season is about taking responsibility for different areas of our lives. And today we're going to be talking about the area of relationships and boundaries, talking about how boundaries can help us honor ourselves and honor those people who God has brought into our lives. So we're going to dive in today and find out how setting boundaries isn't just good for our emotional health, but it is actually good for us spiritually, and it's actually biblical. So we're going to take a look at some scriptures. Proverbs 4:23. I really want this to be the theme of today's podcast, and it says this: above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And when I think about that scripture and the word guarding, I think about our responsibility to set limits in our life. That part of guarding our hearts is making a willful decision to set limits. And a lot of times as women, especially women of faith or people of faith in general, we think boundaries are a negative thing. We can think that maybe saying no is wrong, that we should just say yes to everything and everyone. We can think that there is a guilt that should accompany saying no or setting boundaries in our lives, and that's just not so. Even Jesus himself set boundaries. We see that there were times where he would have to tell the people that were following him, like, no, I'm not going to minister anymore. I'm going to actually withdraw, and I'm going to go up and I am going to pray on the mountain. What was Jesus doing there? He was setting a boundary in his life to say, I'm going to give to you, but there is a boundary line where I need to go and I need to take care of some things with the Father. And so we see that it's a biblical pattern, and there's so many benefits that come from setting boundaries in our life. So first of all, let's talk about what is a boundary. What is a boundary? It's defining a boundary not as something that we use as an excuse to just put up a wall or to shut people out of our lives, to cancel people softly. I feel like in the Christian world, many times we can use the word boundary as an excuse to maybe not act in love or to not extend forgiveness or work on a relationship, or maybe just an excuse not to do something. But boundaries, when done right, they're not walls. They're actually bridges that allow us to create healthy relationships with other people while still honoring ourselves in the space that we need to recharge and be with God. And so understanding that boundaries are actually created to protect and establish limits for us. Thinking about that, boundaries are to protect. When God created boundaries in the Bible with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, it wasn't because he wanted something bad for them. He was actually trying to provide protection to them. Like, you can have the whole garden, but I'm setting a boundary line of an area that you're not allowed to go. And it was for their own good. Thinking about that, even with God's laws and the 10 Commandments, they're not boundary lines so that God can have some weird control over our lives. It's for our own good and our own protection. And when boundary lines are created in our life, they do provide protection. They give us healthy limits in our life that will help to guide us in the direction and the plan of God for our lives to maintain those healthy relationships. So by the end of this podcast, my prayer is this: that you walk into conversations and you set boundary lines and limits in your life without feeling a sense of guilt, shame, manipulation, that you're clear and confident of the boundary lines that you need to create. So let's dive in and let's take a look at different ways and different reasons why we need to create boundaries to develop and take responsibility for the relationships in our lives. Nothing good happens by accident. And when you realize that there's a responsibility that you have to the relationships around you, there is a different perspective that you take. If there's a relationship that you don't like, if there's something in your schedule that you don't like, it's your responsibility to address it and establish those boundaries. Boundaries not only speak to limits and protection, boundaries speak to domain. My house has boundary lines on it. And if something or somebody infringes upon those boundary lines, I have the authority to ask them to please step off of my property because it's mine. And that's how our lives are, that God has given you a life and you're going to be accountable for that life. And so boundary lines also remind us that we have domain to really occupy and really dictate what is allowed into our lives and how much of us we can give to it. And so the first area that we need to establish boundaries for healthy relationships are in the area of needy people or needy things in our life. I love the reminder that if we don't have a plan, that life will just kind of come in and consume us. That means there will always be needs around us, whether it is needs to serve at school on the PTA, needs at the church. There will always be needs that present themselves to us. And if we're not careful, these needs can become endless and bottomless. And before we know it, we are just running around taking care of other people and other things and losing perspective of the purpose and the plan that God gave for us in our life. You know, God gave us a special plan that we need to move forward to obey and walk out. And only you know what your plan is. But it's very important that you set the boundary lines in your life so that all of these other little things, all the other urgent things, don't continue to rob us of the important things in our life. Not that helping a friend or doing something at a school isn't important, but there are other things in our lives that maybe God is calling us to invest in that we simply just don't have the time for. Yet we keep doing these little things because there is a need. There will always be bleeding needs, whether it's a friend that always needs your help, whether it is somebody who is always texting you or making phone calls. Setting boundaries with the needy people in our lives. You know, Jesus did this. I mentioned it a couple seconds ago, but even in Luke, we see that Jesus in Luke 5:16, that he would go off to pray. He would go off and he would set boundary lines in his life. He said no to requests that people had and set clear expectations for his followers. So there were times where the crowd wanted more and more and more and more of Jesus. Thinking about that, like Jesus had so much to give. He was healing people. He loved people. He had a mission while he was on this earth to get the work done. And yet he still said no. He still had the ability to separate the need from what his mission was in the moment. I want you to hear that. Separating the needs all around us to our mission in the moment. And if you don't set boundary lines and if you don't take authority and set limits in this area of your life, everyone and everything will try to do it for you. Maybe you are listening to this podcast and you're constantly frustrated because you feel like you're busy all day long, yet you're not productive. Well, maybe that is a sign that you need to establish a boundary in your life to say no to some needy people, to say no to some things that are happening around you. I'm so glad you're tuning into the Joie Miller Podcast. I want to make you aware of a new product that we have, and that is our 30-day Occupy devotional. This season of the Joie Miller Podcast has been all about taking responsibility, and this is a great companion to that topic, occupying every space that God has given you in 2025. Grab it today at joiemiller.co. No, it's a complete sentence. You shouldn't feel guilty when your motive is pure to say no. When you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else in your life. I want you to remember that. Every time that you're saying no and having the confidence to say no, you're saying yes to something else. When you say yes to something, you're also saying no to something else. So really, it helps us to get our priorities clear when we set and take responsibility for those boundaries. It's not that we don't love people. We will help people. We'll continue to invest in people, but we can't let people run and dominate our lives. We have to set clear lines, and we have to have the confidence to say no. That doesn't mean you're not a Christian if you say no. You can say no with kindness and clarity and give a nice why. And no doesn't mean never. Maybe that means not today. Not in this moment. thinking about times in my life where needy people just would constantly be texting me or calling me. And I had to set a boundary line, because what was happening was my day was being constantly hijacked by just the chaos of other people's lives. So I was living a life of peace, but there was chaos coming in from every angle. And I would find myself trying to spend time with my kids, and it would be a text, and the sky is falling, and oh my goodness. But it wasn't just an isolated incident. The texts became more frequent. Like everyone was having an emergency in the moment. And I found myself thinking, wow, for living like a life right before the Lord, I sure am dealing with a lot of conflict and chaos. And what I did was I started to let other people's issues and problems start to become my problems. And as a person of faith, we want to help everybody, but we have to set that boundary line to say, your problems are your problems. I'm going to help you with them. I'm going to help you, give you scriptures to deal with them. I'm going to pray for you. But I have to set a boundary line up in my life. You know, one of the great rules is not to let the urgent rob you of the important, in a way of setting boundaries even with your phone, Instagram messages, text. We live in a day and age where it used to be you'd have to call on a landline. And so you would pretty much honor that between certain hours. But now we can send a text at 3 a.m. and think, oh, they're not going to hear it. Well, what happens is you get a ding and you look at your phone and you feel obligated to respond to that text. And now these people are controlling and ruling your schedule, your life. And so setting boundaries, even with your phone, make a decision, and tell the people around you, when you contact me, I might not contact you back right away. And that doesn't mean I didn't see it and I don't care. That means that I am going to get back to it within 24 hours. And so you're training and putting a boundary line around people. If you're just constantly responding to that friend, if you're constantly just responding to that coworker in off hours, you're training them that they can do that. When you set up the boundary line kindly, you are reestablishing the limit in your life. And you're saying, you know what, right now I'm with my family, but first thing tomorrow, I'll give you a call. And so you're retraining and teaching people how to honor your boundaries. And in doing so, you're honoring your family. So as you're saying, no, I'm not going to respond right now, you're saying yes to your family time. You're saying yes to that other thing that is important to you. So set boundaries with those amazing needy people in our lives. We love them, but there's only so much of us that we can give. And then set boundaries in your life. Number 2, to stay in a place of honor and love in the relationships around you. So number 1 was dealing with needy people. Number 2 are those difficult people in our lives. Yes, we all have them. Difficult people that might find that it's hard to love these people in our lives. You know, boundaries, they help us stay in a place where we're actually living and walking out Proverbs 4:23, which is to guard our hearts. There's difficult relationships in our life. I mean, life would be so easy if it weren't for people, right? But you know, oftentimes we are in a position where we want to love, we want to stay in that place of forgiveness. We want to honor these people in our lives, especially if we're stuck with them. You know what I'm saying? The people in our lives that maybe are family members or coworkers that we really don't have a choice in the matter. Some difficult people in your life, the boundary line might look like an exit door. It might look like, you know what, I'm going to kindly exit this room of this relationship because this is a toxic relationship. This is a toxic friendship. Maybe that constant chaos that I was talking about isn't just somebody who is trying to contact you occasionally. It's a close friendship that you've just always had in your life. And I would tell you this, sometimes you need to say goodbye. Sometimes that boundary line is goodbye. I love you. It doesn't have to be super dramatic, like a super friend breakup. A relationship, maybe it is a breakup that you have to say, you know what, this is stealing my peace. This is robbing my joy. This is not an expression of me guarding my heart. I'm finding that I'm always in inner conflict, in turmoil. And so I'm going to take responsibility for my life, and I'm going to trust God that if I let go of something, He has something even better. So sometimes it is an exit door, and that's okay. It's okay to establish that boundary by withdrawing and not engaging in that relationship anymore. And I would say this, you know, guarding your heart on social media, if there are relationships that have been toxic in your life, you don't have to be nasty about it. You can mute them. You don't even have to unfollow them. You can just hit the mute button so that it's not a big deal. They're like, oh my gosh, you unfollowed me on social media. No, it's mute. What you're saying is, I'm going to mute this from my life because I don't need to be seeing it. Because every time my eyes are exposed to it, my heart is challenged. And that's what putting up that boundary line does. It puts that protectant around your heart so that you can walk in love and forgiveness. If we're constantly exposing ourselves to that thing, that relationship, that toxic pattern. And let me just say this, that person might not even know they're toxic to you. It's less about even them and it's about you. How does it make you feel? How does it make you respond? There are many people in my life that I have quietly muted on social media that they haven't done anything out of ill will towards me. I know it's not healthy for my heart to be engaging and seeing those things. So to protect my heart, I've set up that boundary line in my life. It has nothing to do with them, and it has to do with me taking responsibility for stewarding my own heart, my own emotions, my own thoughts. And so, maybe it is an exit, but maybe there's people in your life that you can't escape from, right? That family member, that mother who's always being negative, that sister who has jealousy issues, that friend who has just always been a lifelong friend and they're intertwined in your circle, that mother-in-law, that coworker that you have to see every day. How do you deal with these difficult people? Setting up that boundary line so that you are able to operate in a place of love. Jesus talks about walking in forgiveness and love. And he in Matthew 18:21-22, if you want to look at it with me or write it down for later, Peter came to Jesus and he asked, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? I love this question. Don't you feel like asking the Lord this question sometimes? Like, how many times? Like, just tell me, how many times am I going to have to do this? And Jesus answered and he says, I tell you this, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. So he said, you're going to have to continue. The point was, he was being exaggerative here. Like, you have to, there is not a number. You have to continue to forgive. And, many times in my life and situations, I've been like, okay, Lord, I know I need to forgive. But I just feel like it's more than my heart can take. I feel like I am constantly re-exposing myself to this pain. And the Lord instructed me that part of love and part of staying in honor in these relationships, part of the key to being able to forgive 7 times, because trust me, I've tried every angle. Like, but God, did you see what they did? But God, they're a Christian, they should know better. But God, and the answer is always forgiveness and love. There's no shortcut around it. There's no being ugly. Like, it's always forgiveness and love. But one of the keys that the Lord helps us with in this area is the aspect of guarding our hearts, of putting up boundaries around that person so that you still can honor and love them. If somebody is toxic in your life and you continue to give them full access to your heart, you are doing yourself a disjustice, and you're doing that relationship a disjustice, because what you're doing is you're constantly confronting your heart with offense and bitterness and just feeling pain constantly. Thinking about that, like if you get a cut, there's a scab that goes over it. It needs time to heal, and that scab is to protect that cut, that wound. And when we constantly expose and don't set up boundaries in our life, it's like as soon as we decide to forgive and that scab and that healing starts to happen, we're exposing ourselves to it again, and it's ripping it off, and we're bleeding again. And so when you set up boundaries, it gives your heart a safe space to heal and mend and still operate from a distance, that you can actually find a space that is comfortable for you, put up your boundary line, establish your limit of what that looks like, that you can still stay in that place of honor. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it is a mom or a mother-in-law, and you've tried to re-engage, and maybe you're trying to put them in a position that they just can't fulfill. Sometimes we try to put relationships in our life and we try to label them or have this romanticized effect of who that person should be, expectations on them. And it's really not fair to them because maybe they're just not able to be that. Maybe that's just not how they were raised. And so boundary lines allow us to say, that's not who you are in my life. I tried to give you full access and you just can't be that. And that's okay. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a boundary line. I'm going to redefine within that boundary of who you are and what access you can have to my life. So maybe you put expectations on maybe a mother, and you wanted that mother to always be a constant source of positivity and encouragement. And instead, she is a voice of negativity. My mother was amazing woman. She loved me so much, but she had negative tendencies. And so, really recognize that and say, you're not going to be that person, but I'm going to put a boundary line up. So maybe I don't share everything with you, or maybe I don't engage in a conversation that can take us down a wrong path, that maybe I am putting you in a place that is naturally setting our relationship up for failure. So I'm going to establish that boundary line so that I can still love and honor you, and I can still, share some things with you, but maybe not everything. Maybe I don't talk to you every second. Maybe I don't share with you when my husband and I have an argument, or when I have a falling out with one of my children. That's a boundary line that you're setting. You're being smart about it and saying, you know what, I have responsibility to set the boundary life over the difficult people and difficult relationships in my life. Not everybody has to have a full access pass to your heart. And when you operate in forgiveness, that means that you are operating in love. Jesus loved people, but he didn't entrust himself to people. That meant this: he got his affirmation, he got his confidence, he got his identity from the Father, and everything else was a flow outward. And when you set up those boundaries, you have the freedom to love people on a different level. You see them now as Jesus saw them. Like, I'm sorry I put you in a position that you keep failing. That was my fault. I'm going to love you as you are, as God created you to be. And I'm going to set up the boundaries accordingly in my life so that I can operate in that love and honor, so that I can guard my heart and yet still forgive 70 times 7 times in my life. So setting those boundary lines up around those difficult relationships in our lives. This is going to set somebody free today. You're going to be like, I didn't know how to deal with that person. I felt like I was going to lose my ever-loving mind. I feel like every time I'm around them, I have to get resaved again. How do I love this person? Set up a healthy boundary. It helps you operate in love and protect your heart. Point number 3 is this: boundaries help protect your personal peace. Your personal peace. Like we talked about before, if you feel like your life is just in a chaotic spin all the time, especially as a woman, I feel like we wear so many hats. Like we have to be so many different things to so many different people. If you're not establishing those boundaries, you will operate from a place where you are burnt out, that you won't operate in joy and peace anymore. So not only protecting yourself from needy people and from difficult people, but really boundaries protect you from your own self, of just operating from a place on self-destruct mode. You know what I'm talking about? If you've ever had a meltdown moment where you feel like the sky is falling and the world's falling apart around you, and nothing really is that bad if you step back and look at it, you're just feeling overwhelmed all the time because you haven't set a boundary for personal time and personal space in your life. You know, God actually commands us to rest in the scripture. It's not a suggestion. He talks about the Sabbath and setting boundary lines even around our schedule for rest, that we're to work 6 days and on the 7th day we are to rest. It's not because it's just a good idea, but God created us and he knows how important it is for us to rest and recharge in order to be everything that everyone needs us or wants us to be, or even the best version of ourselves. And so establishing boundary lines help us and give us permission to rest in our schedules, to protect our peace. Even Jesus in Matthew 11:28, it talks about taking our burdens to the Lord, taking the things that we carry around that make us tired and weary, and laying them at the Lord's feet. And that's what establishing those boundaries are. It's saying, you know what, I'm going to set everything aside. I'm going to give it to you, and I'm just going to enjoy your presence for a little bit, Lord. I'm going to establish my boundary time around my spiritual walk in my life. If we're not careful, we can even let doing good things rob rob us of our time with God. Maybe you haven't set a boundary around your relationship with the Lord. And now you are operating in a place where you are giving, and not being recharged and refilled. You need to set a boundary line, even if that means getting up earlier, taking responsibility and saying, I'm going to set a boundary line. This is my time that I read my Bible and pray. The dishes will get done later. We'll turn on some cartoons later for the kids. Whatever it is, I am putting a boundary line and I'm guarding my heart. I'm protecting that which I know is vital to me. Rest is a command. It's not a suggestion. So how do you need to reorganize and set up that time so that you're having time to rest, whatever that means to you, to refill, to recharge? It is amazing what a nap, some food, and some worship music will do to turn around your day. Set boundary times for rest and peace. So 3 steps we're going to talk about to create healthy boundaries starting right now. Write them down. Number 1 is identify where you feel overwhelmed. Is there an area of your life that you feel like you're out of control in, that other things are invading on your space, your territory, your limits? Identify what those things are. And then number 2 is pray for clarity on what needs to change in that situation. Is it you? Is it another relationship? Is it your schedule? Is it you saying no to some things? And number 3 is start communicating your boundaries with kindness and confidence. Kindness and confidence. Remember, no is a complete sentence, and you don't have to give a nasty no. Did you hear me, Christians? You don't have to give a nasty no. So many times we think we're being unkind, or we can allow ourselves to be manipulated by people. Let me tell you this. People do not like other people's boundaries. So they will always try to push them, and they'll always try to manipulate them. And no matter what that relationship is, maybe it's that family member. And they're, oh, you don't want to come see me. You don't love me. One day you're going to miss me when I'm gone. All of the manipulation that comes with it. And you say, oh, no. What do? You confront it with truth. You say, oh, that's silly. Of course I want to come see you. I love coming to see you, but I can't do it today. But next week, let's plan a lunch together. What did you do? You said no. You kept your clear boundary, and you redirected and taught them, like, your manipulation, I love you so much, but it doesn't work with me. And so you're being clear and you're being kind with that. So move forward in setting boundaries in your life. God is going to use this as you take responsibility for the relationships in your life. God will use boundaries to help you operate in a greater sense of love to those around you. So set some boundaries. If you enjoyed this podcast, like and share it with a friend. Leave a comment. Follow us on social media at joiemiller.co for more encouragement. And until next time, when we talk about more relationships, we'll see you soon.